Hello, this is Danielle Geppel, Event Coordinator from Trade Press Media Group. Thanks for joining us for today's webcast, Why Fire and Life Safety Systems Are Critical for Healthy Buildings. Our presenter today is John Hughes, Vice President of Product Management and Marketing at Edwards. John has over 20 years of product marketing and relationship management experience, including 16 in the fire and security industry. John began his career with Carrier through the acquisition of GE Security in 2010. Today's webcast learning objectives include understand the positive impacts of healthy buildings, educate and increase awareness of how and why fire and life safety systems play a role in a healthy building, and examine the actionable steps for immediate impact and long-term benefit. Before we get started with today's webcast, I'd like to cover a few details about today's event. A live question and answer session will follow today's presentation. To submit questions, please navigate to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions. Our presenter will answer as many questions as time permits. Today's event will also include a multiple choice polling question. Your input is greatly appreciated. You will receive a PDF copy of today's presentation slides about 24 hours after the conclusion of today's event. You will also receive a link to a brief online assessment. Upon successful completion, you will receive your CEU certificate. Today's webcast will also be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcast. And now a brief word from our sponsor.
Since 1872, Edwards has led the way with innovative fire detection and alarm solutions. From economical control panels to high-end life safety and emergency communication platforms, this rich legacy of inventiveness and uncompromising quality has distinguished Edwards Life Safety Systems as the technologies of choice among building owners and designers the world over. Based in Bradenton, Florida, Edwards is part of Carrier, a leading global provider of innovative HVAC, refrigeration, fire, security, and building automation technologies.
And with that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
Great. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you to the Trade Press team for hosting this webinar today. As you heard, my name is John Hughes. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Edwards Life Safety, and I appreciate everyone taking time today to learn more about this topic. And equally importantly, I hope that you and your families and colleagues are all safe and healthy. As we begin here, I'd like to start with the fact that it's certainly no secret to you that COVID has and continues to disrupt millions of lives and the global economy for that matter. And, it's an impact that really could extend for many years. And before COVID, there was a lot of discussion about smart, intelligent buildings focused mostly on lowering energy costs, but also integration of systems throughout the building, and then on improving occupant experience. And while those smart buildings are still important, the conversation has changed to a new focus, occupant well-being. Buildings are increasingly being designed or renovated to support health and well-being of occupants. And sometimes in this process, unfortunately, fire and life safety systems are often overlooked as also being an important factor in creating a desirable built environment. So today, I'm going to walk you through a brief overview on what healthy buildings mean and how fire and life safety systems are a part of that overall environment. Then we'll get into some specifics around how these systems can improve the safety of occupants and what some of the new technologies are in this arena. So with that, let's talk briefly about the current status. Buildings are increasingly being designed to support the health and well-being of occupants, as I mentioned. Building codes, design guidelines, standards are constantly being updated, including helping to address the pandemic, but all in all require innovative thinking around the design of these buildings, as well as retrofitting existing ones. Buildings can directly impact the bottom line for a business, whether that's reducing operational costs through energy reduction or energy waste, whether it's increasing worker productivity, even securing higher rents and improving occupant satisfaction scores, that overall leads to higher retention and distinguishes a workplace from simply being safe to being seamlessly healthy and safe. Today's reality is that because of COVID, occupants have new expectations for their health and safety in indoor environments. Heating and air, security, life safety systems, they all play a critical role here in providing the confidence that occupants need to return to the places where they work, learn, or visit. And that's something we can look at here from a numbers perspective. And so thinking about healthy buildings at this level, it starts with the fact that we spend about 90% of our time indoors, which is really a staggering number if you come to think about it. And certainly keeping people safe and secure is an imperative for all of us. But if you take a step back at some studies that have been done recently around impact on health and cognitive function, and these are studies called the green impact of green buildings on cognitive function, or the COG-FX study, and the health FX study, or the health co-benefits of green buildings. What the researchers found is that certain technologies designed around green buildings can actually improve cognitive function. As you see here, crisis response scores increased significantly. Information usage and strategy scores increased nearly 300% from these type of buildings. And if you think about individual personal health, what they saw when they were looking at high-performing green certified buildings versus non-certified buildings, fewer individual sick symptoms and better overall environmental perceptions of the places that they were spending their time. Even things like better sleep quality scores emerged from the research. And then if you think about it from a macro level, there can be even far greater improvements in terms of impact. Just in energy costs alone, they can be significant benefit. And when you think about broader climate and health benefits, it can become a very significant number when we start to think about what can a healthy building environment really create. And I think each of us can play a role, whether that's designing a building, specifying the products to be used, or maintaining the system's infrastructure that they're in. All of these decisions can add up to major implications that are shown on this page, such as the cognitive function and personal and societal health. So I think it's very impressive to think about the impact we can have together as we consider these type of things. And our purpose at Carrier and Edwards is to make the world a safer, healthier place to live. And this is why Carrier created the Healthy Buildings program. And I want to provide a brief overview here before we continue on to the presentation. So through healthy building strategies and expertise, we start shifting the role of buildings beyond places just to live, work, and learn into really powerful tools that drive human health and progress. With a focus on 6 verticals shown here, the Carrier Healthy Building Program provides an expanded suite of advanced solutions to help deliver a healthier, safer, more efficient, and productive indoor environment. And related to this, we wanted to do a quick poll about healthy buildings and where you are in your familiarity of offerings around these type of solutions.
Yeah, in a few seconds, you should all see a pop-up notification to answer the polling question, which reads, which of the following would you expect to deliver healthy building solutions? A, mechanical contractor, B, fire alarm contractor, C, security integrator, D, manufacturer of healthy building solutions, or E, other. We will give you a few moments. We do appreciate your participation. Thanks everyone for participating, and I will turn it back to John.
Thanks, Danielle. Thank you everybody for your input on this. It's helpful for us to get a bearing on where our customers are in their journey in this topic. And part of that is related to the fact that our innovations usually start with meeting customer needs. And so it's really important for us to have this type of dialogue with you today and on an ongoing basis to make sure that we are capturing input. And moving forward here, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this concept of healthy building. And there are really numerous areas to consider, as I've mentioned, when you think about a healthy building. And while a major focus is of the heating and air, the overall indoor environment, indoor air quality, and the statistics on the earlier page focused on green building technologies, there is another fundamental aspect of healthy buildings, and that is the overall safety and security of that environment. And if you think about it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety and security really is fundamental to our ability to thrive. I mean, it comes after our basic needs like food and water. The next level up is safety and security. So this is certainly a foundational element of any healthy building, is to make sure that the occupants feel safe and secure. And some data pertinent to this discussion: fires in non-residential buildings resulted in an annual average of 90 deaths, over 1,300 injuries, and over $2 billion in property losses in the US between 2014 and 2016. And other life-threatening emergencies can occur in the building at any time without notice. Fire and life safety systems, I think as most on the call know, are designed to protect life and prevent serious injury. But even without injuries or fatalities, the impact of an emergency can have other lasting impacts. Stress related to these type of events, or even the anticipation of such an event, can negatively impact mental and physical health. There have been other studies similar to what we saw earlier around the mental and physical impact of healthy buildings, but related to chronic stress. And those show similar impacts in a negative way when people don't feel safe or they're worried about their physical environment. And I think we're starting to see employers that recognize the fact that this can actually be a competitive advantage, that healthy workplaces can provide overall by reducing job dissatisfaction, reducing burnout, help to minimize and mitigate other increased health costs, maybe even workers' comp issues. And we like to think that healthy buildings optimized with advanced fire and life safety systems can really help meet that objective. So let's dive in a bit further. As we move more directly into the life safety topic, I wanted to share some insights from a recent Voice of the Customer research initiative. We spoke with a sample of individuals who are responsible for making their buildings safer in today's new normal. Participants were in various roles such as property management, facility management, risk management. There were building owners, architects, even finance, HR, and operations. I think many of our attendees today are highly representative of these important jobs. So I wanted to share a little bit about what we heard as we did this Voice of Customer. As mentioned earlier, occupant expectations are changing as they consider working to the workplace. What am I going to find when I go back to work? It's just a new thing that people are considering. And organizations are at various stages of their planning and implementation processes to improve safety and get people more comfortable in these workplaces, these places of learning, and even places to visit and eat. And we found that regardless of their relative maturity, it was evident that safety was front and center in ways not seen previously. And it is causing several questions to come up. Things like how to ensure building systems are leveraging the latest technology, how to keep everyone safe and healthy without shutting down a building, and what is the long-term financial impact of not maintaining a safe environment for employees? What does it do to employee pride, lease terms, occupant satisfaction, et cetera? In other words, facilities are being challenged with finding solutions that make occupants feel truly safe. What did we hear further from the research participants as to the current status? Well, it was clear that the safety solution tipping point really hasn't been reached. And there are a number of factors that are still being considered. One is a big one, that financial constraints brought on by the pandemic are important. I mean, budgets are tight, capital expenditures are limited as we move through the slowdown in the economy, and that's still a very important consideration. And really outside of, what I'd say outside of fire systems, there is some uncertainty in the effectiveness of today's solutions to manage through a situation like a pandemic. How did we get here today? How are we going to react? Are we going to be as effective as we need to be? Also, there were concerns regarding occupant compliance. What is realistic to ask of employees and visitors? What's in an employer's right to enforce? We also heard that the need for backwards compatibility and forward migration is a prominent consideration. And so, how are these considerations really impacting buildings and enabling the transformation from smart to healthy? The concept of a healthy building is just a natural extension of what was discussed before as a smart building before COVID. And today, the discussion is much more than just smart buildings. It's how these same smart technologies can also help achieve a healthy building. As I've mentioned before, healthy buildings help ensure the sustained health and well-being of occupants while simultaneously making occupants feel safe in the present. And as I covered, there are many dimensions to a healthy building. And now I'm going to share some insights and recommendations to help each of you take proactive steps to ensure safer, healthier buildings. Our research called out two key considerations: confidence and adaptability. So let's talk more about occupant confidence and building adaptability. On confidence, I briefly talked about the psychological implications if these core human needs are not met, which could translate into poor employee performance, such as lower productivity. Opportunities exist through fire and life safety systems to install confidence in occupants that they can safely inhabit buildings. On adaptability, our research identified three main components: longevity, compatibility, and scalability. Longevity refers to technology that will be relevant in the future and won't become outdated soon. Compatibility focuses on solutions that work with an existing system and do not require new or additional infrastructure. And scalability describes technology that can grow along with the changing needs of your facility. And I think it's important to think about it in terms of, today's not a flash in the pan moment. Decisions that are made today will have long-term impact, and they must be compatible with future investments and offer some form of scalability based on the unique needs of each business. So how do we get started? We will now take a look at a few suggestions on how life safety systems can contribute to what we have discussed thus far. So let's tackle the first one, which is going beyond baseline requirements. I think, as most everyone on the call knows, being a building owner or facility manager goes with accepting responsibility for safeguarding the lives of building occupants every day. Part of that responsibility is having knowledge of the advances in the technology and in fire and life safety systems themselves. It's sometimes easy to take for granted the advanced detection, the alarm and signaling technologies that are operating in a facility, but they really are the silent workhorses keeping every occupant secure and safe, making sure that the building is providing that role. And facility and risk managers must think strategically now in fire alarm systems and go well beyond, I just need to meet code, get my certificate of occupancy, or get through my inspection. How do we go beyond just that mentality? The presence of modern building materials, new types of incident threats need to be addressed in new ways. Also, building styles are changing. More campus style, more multi-unit building complexes now require additional and more advanced networking designs that can challenge fire safety practices in new ways. And innovation in life safety systems has increased exponentially over the years to help address these issues. Now, the following are key areas where innovation and other advances can lead to actionable programs. One of the biggest advances in decades in the life safety industry stems from the revised standard for smoke detectors for alarm systems, fire alarm systems. This is also known as UL 268 7th edition. And the revision to the standard incorporates three new tests: 2 polyurethane foam tests for smoldering and flaming fire, and a new cooking nuisance alarm test. The first 2 tests acknowledge that many modern furnishings are made of synthetic materials like polyurethane, and that they ignite and burn faster than traditional materials, making it really important to give building occupants enough time to evacuate. Most fire deaths are caused by smoke inhalation, where smoke overcomes building occupants quickly. Synthetic materials that are common in many of today's buildings can generate dangerous substances in their own right. Polyurethane foam cushioning can contribute majorly to the intensity of the heat and the propagation of the flame spread in a fire. This is a concern because as a fire grows, it can consume a lot of the available oxygen, and that can actually slow the burning process, resulting into incomplete combustion. And incomplete combustion can result in toxic gases that make smoke even more dangerous. The third test of the new standard was designed to differentiate between nuisance particles like cooking smoke, or even dust and steam, and actual hazards. So working to reduce nuisance alarms and therefore reduce disruptions to overall operations. What's interesting about these new standards and these new tests is that existing sensing technologies just were not capable of passing these UL standards. Manufacturers had to go back to the drawing board and develop detector technologies that wouldn't react to a nuisance too quickly, but would react quickly enough to the actual threats. And all UL certified smoke detectors are now required to meet this enhanced requirements by June 30th, 2022. Those of you that may have heard of this before may have seen that the dates moved a couple times. I think this speaks to the challenge of many to comply with these standards, as it is a very difficult dynamic to not alarm on a nuisance, but also alarm quick enough to a real fire threat. And I'm proud to say that in 2018, which will now be 4 years prior to the standard taking place, we were able to achieve certification. In fact, we're the first manufacturer to achieve certification to the standard. What we did is we took a look at optical sensor that is measuring the size, the color, reflectivity, and density of particles, and then reacting only to those that pose a serious fire threat. And while detectors that are already installed are not subject to the new standard, replacements will be. So it is also important to consider the backwards compatibility of the technology. There can be significant savings in being able to replace an old detector with the latest technology without having to go through new wiring or additional programming or other control panel changes. In addition to meeting those new standards, detectors can also be enhanced with multiple sensors like heat and carbon monoxide to increase overall occupant safety. And a little bit more detail on carbon monoxide if you're not familiar, but it's really important that building owners and managers that have gas-powered appliances, things like gas water heaters, boilers, commercial gas dryers, even swimming pool heaters within their facilities, take advantage of either a combination detector or a CO-only detector to protect their occupants not only from smoke, but also the odorless CO gas. CO detectors that are connected to a fire alarm and life safety system, it really provides a quicker response to a CO incident, more so than a standalone battery powered unit that is not connected to that fire alarm system. Time is even more critical during a CO poisoning incident due to the fact that the gas from CO is odorless to most humans. And so having the system being able to detect this and enunciate the alarm is really critical. And beyond detection, and speaking of enunciation and notification, we also want to talk there about notification, which is truly an integral part of the overall life safety system. In any emergency, the speed of decision-making varies greatly from occupancy to occupancy and person to person. In fire events, behavior has been well documented, and one of the most striking findings concerns the extent to which people respond in a timely manner to various types of alarms. One of these studies on human behavior, which was published by a Canadian consulting engineer, revealed that responsiveness to different events or different alarms was as follows: bells 13%, texted information 45%, and voice messages 75%. Clearly, efficient and effective occupant voice notification strategies are critical in a commercial building. Obviously, some occupancy types already are required to use pre-recorded or live voice instructions rather than an audible tone. High rises have had this requirement for some time now. But another example is schools with greater than 100 occupants now require voice alarms. And the trend towards deploying voice in more and more application is only intensifying because it is much more effective than simple tones, as we just heard. The key to this, I think, really is the fact that advanced voice alarm systems can produce the right message to be heard at the right time by the right people, helping with more efficient and effective evacuations. Okay, so now hopefully you start to hear that voice notification rationale is pretty clear, but I think it's also important that the messages themselves are clear as well. And so when you evaluate a voice system, there's a couple things to think about. One is the volume or audibility, and that's only one factor though. There's also the clarity of the audio or its intelligibility, and that's equally important. For example, you tend to want to look for speakers that are providing a clear, crisp output over a large area and have the ability to be measured in terms of intelligibility on the speech transmission index, or the STI. Typically, you want to find a speaker that's in excess of 0.76 on that STI scale, and that helps assure you that you would have a speaker that's going to be able to be well understood and not just loud. Another area in notification is the use of specialized low frequency tones that can be deployed and are often required in certain environments like commercial sleeping areas due to their ability to better alert and awaken occupants. This is really important for developers of low-rise multi-dwelling units like condos and apartments, where NFPA code requires these low-frequency tones to be heard inside of each living unit and sleeping space. And it can be tempting to only deploy low-frequency sounders instead of voice, thinking that this might be a more economical choice. However, it has become significantly more cost-effective to deploy emergency voice systems in these applications. And as I'll talk a little bit more here, the return on investment can actually be much better by using voice. The voice evacuation system can deliver both the code-required low-frequency tone and the additional notification through live or pre-recorded messages. Building owners and managers can now get that additional ROI because live voice or pre-recorded messages are distributed building-wide, advising residents to shelter in place, which could be due to fire or due to another type of emergency. As well, once that's done, they can advise the residents that the emergency has ended and the building or the surrounding area is back under normal conditions. This is obviously a huge benefit to first responders as well in managing through these type of situations. And as previously stated, 75% of people respond to voice messages versus bells or a general horn sound. So a cost-effective voice alarm system can help assure more people know what is occurring during an emergency. On the fire panel side, another of the advances available here is around improved survivability. And what I mean by survivability in this case are things like having the audio messages being stored at each panel in a network of panels. And being stored in each panel database allows them to be independently capable of broadcasting the appropriate messages at that right time. In other words, if you have a fire in one zone, it does not necessarily result in the loss of communication in any other zone. This is really crucial in facilities that react to emergencies by zones or floors. One more point on notification. The introduction of LED technology for notification appliances, for strobes in particular, and the related lower power requirements that they have can reduce deployment costs and the number of booster power supplies needed in these systems. So making the decision to invest in voice systems is even easier than ever. And just as an example, we've seen in some projects where there's been savings of between 40 and 60% in terms of reducing the need of fewer power supplies and the resulting simpler installation. So fewer power supplies, more efficient installation can really help lead to lower costs of these voice systems being installed. And so I think hopefully many of you are familiar with indoor notification systems, and that gave you a little bit more of a deeper dive, but we can also think about extending the capabilities of these notification systems. With new IP networking technology, systems like our EST4 can also interface with IP telephony and paging systems through simple module interfaces. This allows you to assign an extension to the IP phone system so that the interior and/or exterior fire alarm system speakers, as well as IP phone intercom speakers, can announce an emergency page. So what's the benefit of this? Well, the benefit of this type of interface is that in the event of an emergency, the appropriate staff have the ability to use the phone system to broadcast messages or updates using the fire alarm speaker system, further extending notification capabilities. This provides additional assurance that occupants that may be in a location where there are no intercom speakers still receive the emergency or a non-emergency message. There's also a variety of speaker options that exist today to cover larger areas or areas where it's often difficult to have consistent sound quality. So if you think about over large campus environments or parking garages, there are now loudspeakers that don't have to be huge. They can be very, very light and compact, but have a very clear, loud message broadcast capability in some of these tougher spaces. And often what we've seen is when we use a combination of this type of a system along with these different speaker options, you can actually reduce the amount of paging speakers, further enhancing the return on investment when you think about using the fire alarm system as part of this overall emergency communication. Additionally, the fire alarm system speakers and wiring are supervised. So if there's ever a fault with the speakers or the wiring, the facility staff is going to know immediately that there's an issue and that they can address that issue well before any type of emergency event actually occurs. And a few more points to think about when you're evaluating and designing this type of communication and paging system. Is it expandable? Is it compliant with standards like UL 864 and UL 2572? Does it have the supervision of the main components like I talked about? Does it have battery backup? Can you have significant message storage capacity? What are you going to need in the future? Think about cybersecurity and how you're handling firewalls across, voice over IP and power over Ethernet. And then just think about the disruptions to the business from having less parts and less cable to manage overall. So again, I think extending this out from just incident or just from notification to the concept of incident management and thinking about mass notification being limited to just a distributed messaging service, those concepts are fading because it's only really one part of the equation in overall incident management. Modern incident management systems really have to take advantage of the fire alarm, the mass notification technology, and also building integration in one comprehensive solution. Of paramount importance here is having the capability to interact with multiple systems and external devices, enabling real-time system status and decision-making from anywhere. Distributed messaging may actually only deliver opt-in communications, so the local community and visitors may be left out. But if we combine distributed messaging with in-building and wide-scale voice enunciation from the fire alarm system, that can really help expand coverage, as we just heard. And when you start connecting multiple buildings, up-to-date fire alarm panels should utilize modular architectures that incorporate advancers in network configuration, audio, survivability, and when connecting to external networks, adequate levels of cybersecurity, all while complying with the latest codes and standards. This enhanced capability is not only critical to manage fire and related hazards, but also events like weather emergencies, environmental crises, or even active shooters. I think it's hopefully becoming more clear that modern fire panel systems are ideal for incident management as they're designed, installed, and tested in a manner that ensures survivability. It's something I'm repeating here many times, but I think it's very important to think about this. Are they going to operate when they're most needed? That's really the basic concept of survivability. And additionally, when we use the fire alarm system as the core of emergency communication, it extends the benefits of the voice enunciation and investing there that we spoke about earlier. And so, again, sophisticated notification and incident management strategies are a good segue to talk about safe occupant evacuation. Unlike traditional emergency response applications where elevator service is disabled during a fire alarm event, there actually are new building codes that can allow for occupant evacuation elevators, or OEEs. It's also known as Occupant Evacuation Operation, or OEO, and it's defined by NFPA. But basically what's going on here is you start to have a discrete interface between the fire alarm control unit and the elevator system to prioritize event types and provide occupants with safe and efficient evacuation options. The use of these systems really will typically be for very, very tall buildings, but we are seeing other requirements, some government buildings where they're looking at designing systems that take this into consideration. And it's really going to be used where design might be thinking about the overall evacuation capacity of the building, elevators and stairwells, and evaluating what the most effective way is to get people out of the building. And the way this works is, in the event of an alarm on any given floor, the discrete interface is going to send the elevators to the floors in the evacuation zone, plus additional floors above and below, ensuring that those at highest risk will be able to evacuate quickly. The system delivers real-time audio and visual messages on each floor, indicating the status of the specific evacuation elevator. It provides confirmation signals back to the fire alarm control unit so that audio and visual notifications are consistent. We have multiple messages would be played throughout the facility, depending on where the users are in relation to the evacuation floors. Implementation on something like this, needless to say, is and can be very complicated. So it really behooves anyone looking at this to make sure they're dealing with an extensively trained network of applications engineers and professionals, channel partners like our Edwards partners that have the expertise to be able to work with the elevator manufacturers to integrate some of these state-of-the-art control units for this type of application. Related to safe occupant evacuation is emergency response. Another recent trend to help with overall emergency response is the requirement for buildings to have adequate radio coverage for first responders. And many of you probably know that this was a challenge highlighted during 9/11, and also subsequently in other emergencies where first responder radio systems just did not work as effectively as they needed. So effective coverage is accomplished through what is often referred to as emergency responder communication enhancement systems, ERCES, or you may also have heard of it as DAS, distributed antenna systems, or even BDA for bidirectional amplifiers. All similar related concepts to this theme of enhancing radio communication. And the goal of these systems is to ensure that public safety radio signals meet a minimum standard both inside the building and outside. This allows first responders to communicate effectively in the event of emergency, which can lead to overall occupant safety. In fact, the FCC estimates that an improvement of 1 minute for each 911 response time could save over 10,000 lives in the US annually. So an improvement of 1 minute could save up to 10,000 lives in the US annually. And requirements and standards began to show up for this type of system in 2013, both in NFPA and the International Fire Code. And adoption of these codes in recent years is driving the requirement for these systems. So if you have not yet invested in this area, you may be subject to do so in the future. And this is really impacting most new buildings nationally, and even some existing buildings. For example, in Florida, where we're based, the HJs, or authority having jurisdiction, can determine the minimum radio signal strength for fire department communications in all new high-rise and existing high-rise buildings. And we're seeing other similar requirements where existing buildings are sometimes subject to requiring these type of systems. What it looks like in terms of some of the details, and the IFC 510 spells it out, that 95% of all the areas on each floor should meet signal strength requirements. And the same signal strength requirements are for transmissions that come from within the building to outside of the building. Those also need to be met. And this is something like having a signal strength of 95 dB milliwatts received, which is a very sensitive transmission. So making sure that a very high quality or a signal is being promoted throughout the building and also outside the building for firefighters to be able to communicate, and first responders. And we talked earlier on the healthy building side about green building technologies and the benefits they can have, but there's actually an interesting intersection here is things like low E cladding and other environmental products can actually have an adverse impact on radio coverage, increasing attenuation within a building. And so, you have to really think about different building designs and materials when thinking about what coverage of the radios need to be. And, another interesting piece here that like with fire, each jurisdiction can have unique requirements, such as a few jurisdictions in Northern California now require the monitoring of passive components of these systems. And then there are other national changes coming, things like the creation of NFPA 1225, which is consolidating NFPA 1221 and NFPA 1061, and that is planned for the 2022 edition. There are also updates coming in the International Fire Code following that. Another change in the regulatory and code environment is a new standard, a new UL test standard, which is UL 2524. It's relatively new, just a few years old, and it is becoming, and it will be a required standard in future code updates, both in IFC 510 and NFPA 1225. So not only are buildings required to have these systems, but the systems themselves are going to have to be tested to a new standard. And one question that comes up here from building owners is, who pays for the testing to see if one of these enhancement systems is needed? And the answer is that the building owner is responsible for this. So, it's a burden that the building owner is going to have to bear, but it's important that obviously these systems work, that it's important for the first responders, but it's also important for them to be able to do their job and help the occupants in a critical time of need. Just for reference too, there are also retests if modifications are made to the building or if the public agency's radio system changes. So these are frequencies like UHF, VHF, 700 and 800. And if there are changes to those systems, you may have to test to make sure the building hasn't been impacted. There are also annual testing requirements, just like there are with the fire alarm system. A good resource here is for this type of information is the Safer Buildings Coalition. We'll put a link in the chat as well for that to find more information if you need to. And these systems are required to be monitored by the fire alarm system. And through a recent strategic agreement with ADRF, a leading provider of ERCES solutions, our Edwards partners now have access to this important technology and can deliver as part of their overall building safety offering. In addition to enhanced response, another element of building safety can come from not actually being in the building. That is of having remote monitoring. So if you think about it, keeping people safe is key with any fire system, but if you can leverage remote monitoring and diagnostics, it actually reduces the need to be physically on site at times. We know with fire systems that being on premises is something we have to be, but there are times when we can be more efficient in going to the site to do a repair or to be able to understand what's going on from a distance. So things like the Edwards Fireworks platform can provide engineers and service providers with the ability to connect, interrogate, diagnose, and really at times reduce the amount of time spent in a building servicing a system, but also gives much better overall system and environmental awareness of what's going on in that building or that campus. And so not only potentially can reduce physical interactions, but has the overall positive impact on bottom line through more efficient service visits. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. It's a lot of information, and as I mentioned, this can be a complex channel and complex challenge to think about. The key really is to set a vision for a healthy building and then get started and start making progress. It's not and should not be a one-time effort. It's incremental, but it does require a bold vision and consistent leadership focused on occupant safety and security. And that's really the job of our attendees today that have that type of a responsibility. And just as a reminder, some of the notable points from today: consider safeguarding lives by thinking bigger than just meeting minimum code. What else can you do to enhance the overall occupant safety? Think about increasing the safety by upgrading detectors that have these advanced sensors meeting these latest test standards, getting improved detection and fewer nuisance alarms. Think about how you're notifying occupants and speed that occupant decision-making with those clear and crisp voice notification messages. Think about how to leverage a broader incident management capability, things interfacing with two-way communication, different devices, and both indoor, outdoor speakers, other systems, to make sure you reach occupants where they are when they need to be reached. And think about if you can help occupants evacuate faster or improve response to emergency with the enhanced radio coverage systems. And lastly, extend the reach and advanced capabilities with remote monitoring systems. Again, thank you for your time today. It's a lot of information. I look forward to the progress each of you and us will make towards a healthier and safer building environment. I'm now going to turn it over to our moderators for our Q&A portion of the webinar.
Great. Thank you, John, for that excellent presentation. It is now time for the Q&A portion of today's event. Just a reminder, to submit questions, you can navigate to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions. We have been seeing some questions come through. We have one here that Tim already answered, but I am going to go read it to the audience. It says, what technology allows an owner to keep a fire alarm safety system beyond the typical 7 to 10 life expectancy currently experienced? The state agencies have limited budgets and can't afford for changing and replacing a system every 7 years. When will the fire alarm become a BACnet or other open universal language? And then Tim said, it is more important today for owners to be actively involved in the solution choice for new buildings, as they are when they need to upgrade an existing system to reach the backward compatibility strength of the manufacturer. UL and life safety requirements create obstacles for the open protocol for systems such as BACnet. Do you have anything to comment with that?
Yeah, I would just add to what Tim said there is that, we do have capabilities to keep the system extended, and we do have interfaces that can communicate via BACnet. We're constantly looking at non-code ways to communicate with the fire alarm system. But I would say that what we've seen in our overall fire alarm system is life expectancy that extends even what he says here, 10 years. I mean, we have, EST3 systems that date back, 20 some years. And the way that we design our fire alarm system is to protect that type of investment. So think about an EST3 system that was installed 20 years ago. It can be upgraded using many of the existing infrastructure with an EST4 system, furthering that prior investment. So we do try to make things as evergreen and forward migratable as possible. But as Tim said, there are certain requirements from UL and other codes that create a little bit of the obstacles that some of the other categories and building systems don't have.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question here asks, does Edwards provide fire MNS and incident management strategies through their product mix?
Yeah, so I talked about this briefly in the discussion, but we have, as I mentioned, the EST4 system is an overall fire alarm, life safety, and emergency communication platform that can do fire and mass notification applications in and of itself. So using amber-colored strobes, voice or amber strobes with the voice system is one deployment. You can extend that with our fireworks product, which gives you a graphical user interface and a way to integrate with other systems, broadening the overall capacity of that incident management and an MNS system.
Okay. And we did also have a question about the studies you mentioned about the text and voice notification response rates, and just wondering what the name of the studies were, if you have that off the top of your head.
So there was a couple different studies I referenced. Can you repeat which one I was referring to?
Yeah, it says the study that showed the tones, text, and voice notification response rates, and then also the study about the improvement in 1 minute saving 10,000 lives.
Yeah, that was from a Canadian consulting engineer publication. I don't have the specific reference to that handy, but I can certainly provide that.
Great, thank you. And then another question here, is radon on the horizon for a new detector?
I think you said radon.
Yes.
Yeah, we are, looking constantly at what kind of things we can detect. I mean, radon is not something we're immediately working on. It is something to consider, and we'll take that as an interesting thing to look at. Oftentimes we find radon more prevalent in residential settings than commercial, but it can be there. So it is something to consider as we think about what other types of materials we can sense with our product.
Great, thank you. And then can you talk about the risk mitigating features in the newest systems?
Say that one more time, please, Daniel.
We had a question. It says, can you talk about the risk mitigating features in the newest systems?
So I talked a little bit about this as well. This is a broad category here, but fundamentally, just the fact that we go through design standards that relate back to NFPA and International Fire Code, certain things we have to do, and then that we're tested against UL requirements. In the case of a fire alarm panel, UL 864, or the mass notification standard UL 2572, and various other standards for the other components, means that we have to be reliable, we have to be survivable, even down to the component level. So these are often the case where we are having to prove that the individual components have a life of their own that can be reliable in all cases, and we go to that level of detail to ensure that these systems are in fact reliable and redundant and survivable. So again, there's a lot more that we do there. We're working on things, like I mentioned, to have audio stored in each panel database, so we have additional redundancy there, and there's a lot of other information we're considering to make systems even more redundant and survivable.
Great. Another question here. After a FA system has a trouble and is reset, what is the timeout period before it resounds? Or the remote guide to go to site for follow-up?
Yeah, I think that's a specific question I can't answer. I think there's, I don't know, Tim, if you have a input on that. If there's one standard there, I think it can vary, but.
Yeah, so that would actually come out of the requirements from NFPA 72, and we'll just take Ron's question and respond back to him with the actual chapter and verse in NFPA 72 for those timing requirements, but that's where that's outlined in the requirements.
Perfect. Thank you.
We have another question here. He is wondering what the name to refer to the smoke alarms with that are less sensitive to dust, steam, cooking smoke, as they ask others about them.
Yeah, so just one distinguishing thing. So if we're talking about commercial smoke detectors, and the way the standard describes those, they now call them multi-criteria detectors to incorporate, this type of sensing. Our product is called the Edwards Signature Optica, which has been shipping since 2019. And so everything we ship now in the US is an Edwards Optica detector, meets the new requirements of being able to pass the new polyurethane and the nuisance test. So you might see it say multi-criteria, but even older detectors that are not listed to that new standard might have used that terminology. So it's really important to look for the UL label that says certified to UL 268 7th edition. That's really important. 7th edition is the new standard. And so again, if you look for that in generic terms or talk about 7th edition certified detectors, that will help you. If you're asking about the Edwards product, it's again the Optica detector.
Thank you.
And John, just to add, we did provide the link in the chat for the brochure that'll provide that information as well.
Okay.
In regards to the remote monitoring services that were mentioned, are these similar to building automation products that can monitor and react to potential system issues, such as detector failure, opens, shorts, etc., and notify the Edwards service provider to attend to an issue?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe two categories here. I think one is there's certain things with the fire alarm system that are always going to have to be done and managed locally on premise, and in terms of reacting to the system issues and making changes. So a remote monitoring service can certainly, notify whether it's the facility management staff or a service provider that there's an issue, and make that much more effective in terms of knowing what to do once they get to the site and need to make a change. So it certainly has the ability to improve and enhance overall service efficiency from that perspective. Making changes based on that remotely is a bit more of a complex situation, and you really need to have a listed system for command and control. Like our Fireworks platform can be set up in a UL listed way to do command and control, but that's different than just having a remote connectivity that's not set up that way. So that's why I wanted to separate those two details.
Okay, thank you. Does a zoned system have a longer life?
I don't know that I would necessarily say it has a longer life. If we're talking about zone being modular or being networked, like a networked fire alarm system, it's certainly flexible and can, help adapt when a system or a facility grows. So if there's additional buildings being added and you have a network fire alarm system, being able to add panel nodes to that network certainly allows that system to have a longer life. If you're referring to a zone system in terms of an old conventional system, those are out there a bit, but certainly don't have a scale that an intelligent addressable system would. But in general, I think if the nature of the question was around, does a network fire alarm system that can be distributed have a longer life? It's just more flexible in terms of growing with that facility need.
Gotcha. What can systems do to save building owners money?
Sorry, Danielle, you broke up a little bit there.
What can systems do to save building owners money?
Well, I think a few of the ones I mentioned before that would be important to consider is, leveraging multiple technologies, but having better overall enunciation. So the example of the combination of the paging system, the IP telephony and paging system, and the fire alarm system, we've seen situations where overall number of speakers can be reduced from an installation perspective, thereby saving that end user money on that installation. So it comes from planning ahead of time on that. Another example from a new construction perspective, what we've seen is there are times when a local authority having jurisdiction may, in the middle of a construction project, no less, require certain things like circuit integrity cabling, CI cabling. In the case of like a phased in approach where some tenants are going to be moving in while the rest of the construction is still ongoing. And, if you have a really good channel partner, like an Edwards partner that's qualified to think through system design, they can actually help look at that and find solutions to make that more efficient. We have an example where this specific thing happened. The fire department HJ was requiring CI cabling. We went and looked at it. The partner proposed moving to a EST4, which, because of the way it's architected, allowed for the fire alarm or the fire department to be very comfortable that redundancy and survivability would be intact, and thereby reduce the requirement for CI cabling. And I think it was somewhere near like $200,000 of savings on that project, just from that, rethinking that system design and using the new technology to do that.
Great. And we did have a question about the latest battery backup systems. Could you speak to that at all?
Again, I think that's a broad question. There are certainly code mandates and code references that speak to battery backup requirements. There are also battery backup requirements for the emergency communication enhancement systems I spoke about. So I think it's probably a little bit tough to get into the specifics here, but unless Tim, you want to point anything specific, I'd point them back to some of the NFPA codes.
Yeah, we can be more than happy to follow up with the person in regards to that question, because that would be more driven through a code requirement on survivability of the system during a power outage.
On the changes to the smoke detectors and new requirements, can you confirm if that impacts the detectors we currently have installed?
Yeah, so if you have you already spent money on a fire alarm system and you have detectors in your building, those are not impacted. Those are grandfathered in and do not need to be changed because of the new standard. But as I mentioned, if there are going to be future replacements, those will need to be certified and compliant to the new standard. So be thinking about the backward compatibility there as well. One of the things we sent out in the chat, and I spoke about earlier, is that there are other benefits of going ahead and adopting the new standard even earlier, based on having the fewer nuisance alarms and having better or more quick detection of those new fire types.
Great, thank you. We have a lot of concerns about cybersecurity when systems start connecting to outside networks. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so this is becoming more and more of an interesting topic. Obviously, fire alarm systems typically are on their own proprietary network and often thought of being very isolated from the outside world, but there are more and more requests to do things like remote monitoring, to send information out to other systems, to connect with the building automation system, et cetera. And it's correct when we think about that connectivity that cybersecurity comes into play. And so it's important to think about fire alarm systems and whether or not they're being designed and maintained with that cybersecurity concept in mind. So, even with these capabilities being native in a fire alarm panel, I mean, we use a dedicated firewall module in our EST4, for example, that is for this specific purpose. Even with those kind of native capabilities, it really is a best practice to use that in conjunction with your, commercial IT firewall and other cyber strategies to protect the entire building network and not just the fire alarm network.
Great, thank you. Well, unless any other questions come through, I think we have reached the end of our questions for today. John, thank you again for a great presentation. Are there any final words you would like to leave with the audience?
Again, thanks, Danielle and the Trade Press team for allowing us to talk through this. It's an interesting topic around healthy buildings, and certainly, life safety systems is passionate for us. It's what we do to make the world a better place. We keep improving every day. So happy to share this with everyone and hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder, you will receive an email tomorrow with a copy of today's presentation, as well as a link to take a quick assessment to earn your CEU certificate. Thank you again to Edwards and to John for bringing this content to our audience. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you again for a future event soon. Thanks, bye-bye.